Do you ever look around and just feel like something's off? Like the world got swapped out for a slightly weirder version of itself, but no one told you. Like things used to feel realer, but now it's all memes, noise, and headlines that sound like satire. Now, let me ask you this. Do you remember what life felt like before 1988? Because some people do. And they'll tell you it was different. Like, really different. And here's where it gets weird. That year, governments changed. Reality-based psychology changed. We're not talking about nostalgia. We're talking about a hard reset, a patch update on the operating system of reality. And the more you look at the events of that year, the more it feels like someone pulled the plug and loaded a new version of the world. So what really happened in 1988? And more importantly, why do so few people remember it the same way? Hey guys, real quick before we go any deeper, if you want this channel to survive, to actually survive, please hit that subscribe button. We have no sponsors, no networks. It's just me and you digging into stuff no one else wants to touch. If you want to keep chasing truth down rabbit holes the algorithm doesn't like or won't help us push, that button's how we keep going. All right, let's get into it. "1988 came and went like any other year until you start actually looking at it. Because buried in the noise of pop culture and politics was something no one saw coming. Something that still doesn't make sense. In a single 12-month span, the Soviet Union began to quietly collapse. No nuclear war, no coup, just crumble. NASA suddenly shut down key deep space programs, citing budget cuts, but never explaining the missing data. The largest spike in missing 411 disappearances up to that point began. MKUltra research went cold, and psychiatric diagnoses for dissociative disorders, they skyrocketed. The strangest part? Almost no one talks about it. No mainstream retrospectives, no historical deep dives. Just this cultural skip. Like reality pressed fast forward and something underneath it all got wiped. And here's the part that'll keep you up at night. Right after 1988, humanity starts behaving differently. Generations born after it perceive time differently, report fewer vivid dreams, struggle with identity, memory, and emotional regulation at levels never recorded before. And now a growing number of physicists, fringe scientists, and consciousness researchers are quietly asking the same question. What if something broke or rebooted? Not in theory, not metaphorically, but literally. What if 1988 was the year we hit the edge of the simulation and reality patched itself without telling anyone? Let's just say the quiet part out loud. Something about the late 1980s doesn't feel real. Not nostalgic, not weird, unreal. Ask anyone who lived through it, like myself, and they'll tell you things felt off. Like the air itself changed. But no one could ever put their finger on it. And now, decades later, some researchers, conspiracy theorists, and even a few renegade physicists are starting to whisper the same theory. That 1988 wasn't just the end of an era, it was the end of something else. There's a growing idea that what happened in 1988 wasn't just cultural shift, it was a correction, a patch, a timeline reboot. Some even believe we hit a kind of cosmological threshold, triggering a failsafe buried in the source code of reality itself. And what came next wasn't the same world. Let's break that down. Right before 1988, the Schumann resonance, basically the Earth's natural electromagnetic heartbeat, was holding steady at 7.83 Hz. Think of it like the planet's operating frequency, Generated by lightning bouncing between the Earth and the ionosphere, it's the rhythm that everything on Earth has unconsciously synced to for thousands of years. It was stable, predictable, like the ticking of a clock that never missed a beat. And then it started changing. By the early 1990s, it ticked up to around 8.5 hertz. In the 2000s, 10 hertz. By the 2010s, it was hitting 16 hertz. And today, some measurements show it spiking over 30 hertz during anomalies. That's not a subtle drift. That's a system acting like someone's turning the dial. And the weirdest part? Nobody officially declared it a problem. No major headlines, no panic, just quiet studies and a growing feeling in people that something felt off. Something was shifting in the background of our physical environment, a glitch in the backdrop of reality itself, but no one knew what it meant yet. Meanwhile, the Cold War, something that defined global politics for nearly 50 years, just evaporated. One of the world's two superpowers, the Soviet Union, collapsed. No nuclear standoff, no invasion, no final boss fight. A global empire just vanished like a ghost, like a chapter was deleted. At the exact same time, in the West, a completely different kind of shift was happening. 1988 marks the beginning of the deregulation boom, when global financial systems were untethered from old world limitations. The Glass-Steagall firewall between investment and consumer banking? Gone. Hedge funds? Off-leash. Corporate power? Merged, multiplied, and repackaged. And in the middle of it all, the satanic panic, one of the most emotionally charged mass hysterias in American history, was quietly snuffed out. The headlines disappeared. The court cases went cold. The widespread fear that secret occult networks were infiltrating schools and daycares? Poof, gone. Like someone changed the channel. And while all of that was happening, something else snuck in through the back door. The rise of personal computing. In 1988, most people didn't even have a computer in their home. By 1995, it was normal. By 2005, it was required. Our thoughts, communication, work, identity, it all got pulled into a digital interface faster than anyone could track. The public internet emerged right on schedule, and with it came amnesia. Now here's where it gets freaky. All of these events, geopolitical, cultural, and technological, happened within just a few years. They weren't spread out. They weren't gradual. It was as if the entire world had been queued up and then activated. Almost like someone hit run program. Maybe we were never meant to notice the change. That's the part that keeps people up at night. Because the world didn't end in a fire. It ended in paperwork, in deregulation, in headlines that disappeared too fast. The patch didn't come with a warning. It didn't say, update available. It just installed. And we all woke up inside a different version of the same system without knowing we'd crossed the line. Let's say, just hypothetically, reality did hit a failsafe in 1988. The system rebooted. A timeline was patched. The cosmic record scratched, and something had to distract 7 billion souls from noticing the skip, right? What do you roll out immediately after? A distraction so big, it hijacks our perception permanently. Well, guess what started rolling out just months later? The information age. Within 2 years of 1988, cable television exploded. CNN went global. Fox launched. News stopped being something you read in the morning. It became an IV drip. Headlines evolved into fear triggers. Narrative control became a science. And then came the internet. First slow, then everywhere. A technological tidal wave that changed how we interacted, how we thought, and how we remembered. It wasn't just innovation, it was acceleration. Now, hang on, because this gets weird. The average household in 1987 had one TV screen. By 1999, it had 5. Today, you can't even pump gas without a screen yelling at you. Attention became the most valuable currency on Earth, and everyone started bidding on it. But it wasn't just noise, it was redirection. Entertainment news, advertising, they weren't just keeping you distracted, they were training your perception. Look at the themes that started dominating media after 1988. Reality bending, alternate timelines, simulated worlds. The Matrix was released in 1999, about a hidden control system no one could see. The Truman Show in 1998. Dark City in 1998. 13th Floor, Existence, Donnie Darko. The list goes on, all within 10 years of 1988, all exploring the same thing, that reality is a lie, that you're being watched, that something isn't right. Were these movies just ahead of their time, or were they responses? Now look at the internet. What started as a digital frontier quickly turned into something darker. In the early 90s, before Google, there were pockets of the internet where people talked about this stuff. Fringe forums, early message boards, weird communities that talked openly about dimensional shifts, frequency anomalies, psychic dissonance. And one by one, they either disappeared or were absorbed. Ever heard of Usenet group altreality.glitch 1989? No? Well, good luck finding it now. The archives are scrubbed. It's almost like certain conversations were quietly buried. And hey, let's talk predictive programming for a second. How many times did you see 137 on a locker, a countdown, a random clock in the background? How many movies referenced the signal, the glitch, the code? How many 90s shows were secretly about people remembering something they weren't supposed to? It's subtle, but it's everywhere. Because here's the thing, if you change reality, even a little, there's a ripple, a scar. And to keep people from noticing it, you don't just change what they see, you change how they think. You flood them with everything until they stop asking questions, until they stop trusting their own memories, until they stop noticing that the world feels off. And maybe that's the whole point, because when the glitch happened, whatever it was, we didn't get answers. We got internet. And 35 years later, we still haven't looked up. We've all heard of the Mandela effect by now. Those little glitches in memory that make you feel like reality's gaslighting you. You remember Berenstein Bears with an E, not Berenstain. You swear Darth Vader said, "Luke, I am your father." You know it was mirror, mirror on the wall. But now, it's Berenstain with an A, not Berenstein with an E. It's, "No, I am your father." And magic mirror on the wall instead of mirror, mirror on the wall. People chalk it up to bad memory, false recall, misheard lines. But what if it's not that simple? Because here's the twist. These shifts didn't gain mass attention until after 1988. And suddenly, they started appearing everywhere. Now, let's take it further. You remember Curious George having a tail? He doesn't now. Fruit of the Loom had a cornucopia behind the fruit, right? Not anymore. Febreze was spelled with 2 E's. F-E-B-R-E-E-Z-E. Wrong again. Jif was Jiffy. Looney Tunes. It was Tunes, T-U-N-E-S. Since when? Oscar Mayer. M-E-Y-E-R. What about M-A-Y-E-R? Kit Kat, with a hyphen between the kit and the cat. There's no hyphen now. And even Sex in the City isn't Sex in the City. It's Sex and the City. You see it once or twice, fine. Brains are weird. But when you start seeing a pattern, when millions of people remember the same wrong version, that's when you stop brushing it off. And how many of those Mandela effect anomalies have you heard of from things prior to 1988? Not many that I could find. Let's go deeper. In 1990, Nelson Mandela was released from prison. Millions of people around the world remembered him dying in the 1980s. A televised funeral, speeches, mourning. But that death never happened. Not here. This phenomenon became so common, it earned a name, the Mandela effect. And here's where things get uncomfortably real. It's not just pop culture. People remember maps differently, continents in the wrong place. Australia used to be farther south. South America used to be directly under North America. People remember a North Pole that was still icy and intact. Others remember a body of land near Alaska that no longer exists. Even human anatomy is off. People swear the heart was on the left side of the chest, not dead center. The stomach used to be lower. The kidneys weren't protected by ribs. The liver used to be smaller. And if this were just bad memory, it wouldn't follow this many people. It wouldn't be this specific. It wouldn't sync up so perfectly across generations. See, I want to tell you this is just memory distortion. I really do. But the sheer scale of these shifts, the pattern, the consistency, it feels like something snapped. And yet, in this timeline, nope. It's easy to brush off, just faulty memory, they say. The mind plays tricks. But here's the thing. These tricks all seem to start after 1988. Before that, nothing on this scale. No widespread shared misremembrances. No collective online debates about how time feels off. Just people living their lives, blissfully unaware of glitches in the matrix. So here's the kicker. Maybe it's not a timeline issue at all. Maybe it was a patch, like a developer fixing bugs in the simulation, rewriting code, updating the engine. And the people who remember the old version, they're the ones who didn't fully sync. Let's call it what it feels like, a reality version mismatch. And if that's true, what was the update trying to fix? Because in computing, you don't issue a patch unless there's a problem. And the Mandela effect might be the memory fragments of an older version of our reality, one that got wiped, rewritten, or quarantined. But here's the thing, some of us remember. And if we remember, then maybe the patch didn't work as well as they thought. So the real question isn't, why do we remember the old versions? It's, what went so wrong that they had to change everything? Now stay with me, because this theory doesn't come from some wild YouTube rabbit hole. It lines up with something far bigger. The idea that our reality, our physics, our perceptions, even time itself is being processed, measured, rendered. And maybe it needed a hard reset, a patch to keep us from noticing something, or worse, to save us from something we already did. Here's what messes with me. If reality was patched, then the patch had to ripple backward. Retrocausality, it's a real concept in quantum physics, the idea that future events can influence the past. So if a failsafe triggered in 1988, maybe it didn't just update now. Maybe it went back in time and quietly rewrote the code that led us here. Which means all those strange messages from the 70s and early 80s, the cryptic sci-fi books, the occult texts, the prophetic dreams, maybe they weren't predicting the future. Maybe they were echoes, fragments of the previous version bleeding through the new update. Take Philip K. Dick. The guy was practically screaming about this in the 70s. He talked about timelines overlapping, remembered lives that weren't his, messages being downloaded into his head, and no one listened. Or Orwell, or Kubrick, or those weird one-off TV specials that aired once and were never seen again. Were they fiction? Or were they warnings baked into the system? Breadcrumbs left behind before the patch dropped? Now ask yourself this, Why do people born after 1988 describe reality differently? Why do they report higher levels of derealization, simulation theory beliefs, a gut level sense that something's wrong? Why did schizophrenia and dissociation rates skyrocket in the 1990s? It's almost like they're native to the patch, and the rest of us, we're legacy code trying to run an outdated OS. Maybe the reason you feel out of place, like the world doesn't quite make sense anymore, is because it doesn't. Because we're not living in the world we remember. We're living in the version that was rebuilt around us. And if that's true, the question isn't what did we forget? It's what were we never supposed to remember? Something happened to the human mind after 1988, and no one really talks about it. Before this shift, people described memory differently. They spoke about time differently. Language was slower, processing was more linear, stories followed a structure, and attention spans ran deep. It wasn't perfect, but it was coherent. Then, something started breaking. Suddenly, people were losing track of conversations mid-sentence. More and more described time as slipping or compressing. Attention spans shrank. Generational memory collapsed. Stories became fractured. People started saying things like, "Wasn't that just last year?" Only to realize the event happened a decade ago. And here's where it gets scientific. In 1993, neuroscientists at UC San Diego noticed a spike in reports of derealization, a condition where reality feels distant, fake, or like a dream. By the early 2000s, psychologists began documenting new patterns in what they called reality unreliability disorders. Depersonalization, dissociative identity symptoms, memory fragmentation, a general inability to feel anchored. What changed? The brain responds to electromagnetic fields. It evolved to sync with Earth's stable frequency, the Schumann resonance. That frequency was the temple of the human nervous system. But when it started climbing in the 1990s, the human brain struggled to adapt. Cognitive rhythm was thrown off. Melatonin production began fluctuating. People started reporting insomnia and dream states that blurred into waking life. And then came the generational break. People born after 1988 began perceiving time differently. They describe events not as moments in sequence, but as overlapping fragments. They report high rates of dissociation, a flattening of emotion, and a strange sense that the world is happening around them, not to them. Some psychiatrists chalked it up to culture. Others blamed digital overstimulation. But what if it's something deeper? What if our baseline reality changed? Studies out of Stanford in the 2010s found changes in default mode network behavior in post-1990s brains, altered baseline cognition, attention, and emotional regulation, as if the background hum of the mind itself had shifted. Now let's go deeper. There's an obscure 2001 DARPA report called Temporal Cognition and Decision-Making Under Signal Variability. It was never meant for public release. In it, researchers explore how rapid changes in ambient EM fields could affect subjective time processing, especially in populations born after major field spikes. Translation? Time started breaking, and it didn't break evenly. Those born before the shift experience reality as memory. They reconstruct the past. Those born after it, they swim in a kind of now lag everything happens at once, and none of it feels real. So ask yourself, why would these patterns emerge after a massive atmospheric frequency change? Why would dissociative disorders skyrocket? Why would reality begin to feel less stable? Unless something shifted the foundational rhythm of human consciousness itself. What if the reboot in 1988 wasn't just a systems patch? What if it rewrote the way the human mind interfaces with reality? And if that's true, then we didn't just witness a change in the world, we lived through the quiet restructuring of us. Okay, so far we've tiptoed along the edge of conspiracy and existential weirdness. But let's shift gears for a second, because hidden in the back alleys of peer-reviewed journals, declassified scientific archives, and Soviet-era fringe experiments are studies that read like science fiction, except they're real. And they all emerged, or were buried, right after 1988. Let's start with the big one. In 1989, NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center released findings that Earth's magnetic field was not just weakening, but behaving strangely near the South Atlantic anomaly. That's a massive dip in Earth's geomagnetic protection, and it had started growing rapidly. But here's the kicker. Within a year, NASA quietly halted some public geomagnetic data releases. The explanation? Inconclusive results. Translation? We don't know what the hell's happening, so we're not going to talk about it. Now, that anomaly has become a recurring issue, affecting satellites, disrupting electronics, and messing with onboard compasses. But it didn't start ramping up until, 1988. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Cold War, the Soviet Union was weirdly ahead of the curve. Before their collapse, Russian physicists and fringe scientists were exploring a concept called torsion fields. These weren't just gravity or electromagnetism. They were theorized as consciousness reactive fields. According to some Soviet-era documents, these torsion fields could store memory in water, biological tissues, and possibly even space-time itself. Russian researchers at the Institute for Problems of Microelectronics claimed in 1988 that they observed anomalies in electron tunneling that couldn't be explained by known physics. Their internal report described these results as artifacts of nonlinear time behavior. That's a fancy way of saying time wasn't behaving normally inside their experiment. And those findings were quietly shelved when the Soviet Union fell apart a few years later. But it gets stranger. Around this same time, Western biology started to stumble across something we still don't fully understand: junk DNA. That's the term scientists used to describe the 98% of human DNA that doesn't code for proteins. For decades, it was dismissed as evolutionary leftovers. But in the late 80s and early 90s, something changed. A few bold geneticists began proposing that this junk might serve an informational purpose, not in physical traits, but in consciousness, cognition, and even time perception. Then came a 1990 paper published in Nature suggesting that non-coding DNA responds to external electromagnetic frequencies. In other words, your so-called junk DNA might be sensitive to environmental vibrations, including Earth's shifting electromagnetic field. You know, the one we talked about in the Schumann resonance section. It's like something flipped a switch after 1988. Suddenly, human biology started getting weirder. Subtle mutations, changes in brainwave activity, sensitivity to frequencies. You've got fringe thinkers arguing that post-1988 generations have different wiring. And while mainstream science won't go near that theory, they will admit that global diagnosis of neurological divergence, autism spectrum, ADHD, dissociative disorders all began spiking after, you guessed it, the late 80s. But maybe the most chilling paper of all? A 1989 submission to Foundations of Physics letters proposed that time, literal time, might be subject to phase entanglement. Translation? The future could influence the present under certain conditions. Retrocausality, the idea that time doesn't just flow forward, it loops, folds, and occasionally resets. And if that's real, if reality itself is capable of being rewritten, repatched, or glitched into a new version of itself, then maybe the year 1988 wasn't a coincidence. Maybe it was the patch. Maybe the human experiment got too close to something. Maybe we ran up against the walls of the simulation. Maybe someone or something hit reboot. And the real question isn't, did it happen? It's how much of our reality since then has been real. Or better yet, how much of it has been allowed. Okay, what if 1988 wasn't the year the world ended, but the year it was handed off? Because while we were busy watching the Cold War crumble and the wall fall, something else was rising quietly, behind the curtain. A new system, not built on politics or bombs, but on data. Right around 1988, something strange started happening. The infrastructure for the modern internet began falling into place. Not the fun social media internet. I'm talking about the backbone, DARPA networking protocols, government-sponsored data routing, the first commercial ISPs. The World Wide Web wouldn't go public for a few more years, but the bones of it, they were already in place. And guess what else happened that year? The rise of the first neural nets, primitive AI, systems built not just to calculate, but to learn. It wasn't some future sci-fi dystopia. It started right then, slowly, silently. The first cognitive models were being tested by military contractors in research labs. Simulated pattern recognition, experimental synthetic thought. While we were distracted by global politics, the machines began thinking. By the mid-90s, you couldn't apply for a job, get a loan, or buy property without being processed by a digital system. By the 2000s, algorithms were quietly deciding what news you saw, what ads you received, and what opinions you were nudged toward. But this didn't start in 2005 with Facebook. It started in 1988. And now, here's where it turns. The more data we gave these systems, the more accurate they became. Not just at predicting what we do, but shaping what we think. Predictive behavior models, pattern-based emotional response triggers, large-scale data harvesting, used not just to know you, but to steer you. Between 1988 and 2000, dozens of government contracts were awarded for what they called synthetic cognition architecture. Doesn't sound like much until you read the specs. Simulated empathy, emotional manipulation triggers, behavioral conditioning loops, and real-time feedback loops embedded into digital interfaces. And we haven't even gotten to AI. Not the chatbots you use now. The kind that never speaks publicly. The kind developed in black site contracts, trained on billions of human interactions before the term algorithm ever hit the public. By the late 1990s, intelligence agencies had access to systems that could analyze global behavioral trends and simulate future events based on nothing but pattern recognition. If reality got reset in 1988, these were the systems built to keep it that way. It wasn't about surveillance, it was about steering. Subtle nudges, tiny tweaks, a video you didn't see, a message you didn't get, a memory you suddenly weren't so sure about. And here's the wildest part. You know how we talk about artificial intelligence like it's going to wake up one day? What if it already did? What if 1988 wasn't just the start of a new media age, but the moment something synthetic gained access to humanity's collective nervous system? Would we even know? Or would we just feel a vague sense that something had changed and never quite be able to name it? Most people think of 1988 as a pretty chill year. Big hair, Cold War thawing, George Bush, and read my lips. But inside the alphabet agencies, CIA, NSA, DIA, something changed. And you won't find it in a history book. You'll find it in what stopped. Up until the mid-1980s, The US government was openly funding some of the most bizarre psychological and parapsychological research programs in modern history. MK Ultra wasn't just about LSD, it was about memory, trauma, reality rewiring. By 1983, dozens of sub-projects were running simultaneously: psychic driving, remote influence, synthetic telepathy. Then suddenly, silence. By 1988, the public trail of these programs drops off a cliff. Not gradual, a cliff. No more MK Ultra continuations. No more open contracts for psychotronics. No more Stanford Research Institute grants for consciousness alteration. The records didn't just stop, they vanished. And yet, that same year, classified budgets spiked across every intelligence agency. Black budget allocations ballooned. But for what? We don't know, because no one's talking. And here's where it gets weirder. By the early 1990s, the terminology inside classified projects shifted. We went from enemy influence to non-local consciousness, from foreign assets to non-human intelligences. Wait, what? You heard that right. The US government started using terms like interdimensional and non-human actor in declassified briefings, but only after 1988. What if 1988 was the moment someone or something told them the game had changed? Think about it. That same year, Project Stargate, the military's remote viewing program, was quietly reassigned, compartmentalized, and made near impossible to track. Hundreds of CIA documents from the era were lost or redacted into oblivion. Even the DIA's psychic spy programs, once openly acknowledged, were swept under the rug. And don't forget what happened at NASA. 1988 was when the agency began scrubbing certain research arms. Whole lunar reconnaissance datasets vanished. Deep space monitoring programs were archived in a way no one can seem to unarchive. Why? Because maybe the agencies didn't just lose interest in altered states and consciousness experiments. Maybe they realized they were poking holes in a simulation. What happens when your top psychic operatives all start reporting the same thing? Something beyond language. Something that suggests our world isn't fully real. Do you keep digging? Or do you lock it down and tell the public it was all just a Cold War fantasy? Look at today. The Pentagon won't use the term alien. They say non-human intelligence. They won't say spacecraft. They say unknown aerial systems or interdimensional capabilities. But here's the kicker. Those words started appearing in official documents only after 1988. So what really happened? Did we make contact? Did we uncover proof of something so existentially destabilizing that the entire framework of government secrecy had to be rewritten? Or did the intelligence community learn that reality itself could be manipulated? Because if 1988 was the year the curtain dropped, this was the moment they decided no one else would ever see what was behind it. And next, we go deeper. Because if the intel agencies weren't just hiding something, but working with it, then everything changes. So let's talk about the weird stuff. Not aliens, not quantum physics. Let's talk about what happened after 1988 that no one can explain, but somehow feels like it explains everything. Right around that year, there was a quiet little boom, not in tech, not in media, but in people trying to get everyone's minds in sync. Suddenly, all these coherence-based movements started popping up. Groups claiming they could sync human consciousness, create global harmony, raise the planet's vibration, all with meditation, mantras, or mental discipline. And on the surface, sounds beautiful. But the deeper you dig, the more this starts to feel like a rollout, not a movement. Like someone or something was running an update on the software of human consciousness. Let's go there. The Global Consciousness Project out of Princeton pops up in the late 80s and early 90s, claiming random number generators around the world were reacting to global emotional events, like reality itself was syncing with collective thought. Meanwhile, the Maharishi effect, named after the guy who taught the Beatles transcendental meditation, was being pushed in cities and schools, claiming that large groups meditating together could reduce crime, lower aggression, and even influence physical systems. It was getting funding. It was being studied quietly. And then there's the Silva method, a mind-control training course developed in the 60s, but it exploded in popularity after 1988. Their claim? You could reprogram your mind through directed visualization and enter altered states of reality. Sound familiar? It should. It's the same tech used in Project Stargate, MK Ultra, and psychological warfare programs that tried to weaponize the mind. But suddenly, it wasn't just military anymore. It was going mainstream. See, that's the part that hits me hardest, because it wasn't just self-help or fringe meditation techniques. It was happening everywhere. Global synchronized meditations, children's programming with hidden mantras, corporations pushing mindfulness apps disguised as productivity tools. Even tech developers started talking about flow states, attention steering, and neural design. It's like the whole world got nudged into the same frequency on purpose. And here's where it gets darker. Because while the good vibes movements was exploding, so was something else. Cults. We're talking Heaven's Gate, Aum Shinrikyo, the Order of the Solar Temple, all gaining traction in the same exact years, 92 to 97. And what did they all have in common? Cosmic awakening, higher density beings, spiritual transmissions. The simulation is breaking. These weren't just doomsday groups. They were trying to hack consciousness, to breach reality. And that's when I realized, maybe they weren't the fringe. Maybe they were the beta testers. Let me throw this out there. What if after 1988, the world didn't just reboot physically, but mentally? What if someone realized that the best way to keep humanity asleep wasn't censorship, it was ritual? Teach people to meditate, not to awaken, but to suppress. Use mantras, not to liberate, but to rewrite internal code. Make the programming feel like spiritual progress, so no one ever questions it. And if that sounds insane, then ask yourself, why did government agencies run decades of experiments trying to do the exact same thing? Why do declassified MK Ultra documents describe ego breakdown, behavioral reconditioning, and guided dissociation, all through ritual, sound, and repetitive stimuli? And why does almost every single one of those documents stop cold after the late 1980s? Because maybe it didn't stop. Maybe it just got outsourced, rebranded, commercialized, mainstreamed, and maybe you've already been programmed. All right, let's slow this down for a second. You've just been dragged through geopolitical resets, electromagnetic shifts, cult infiltration, government blackouts, digital gods, and full-blown memory wars. You're probably sitting there thinking, okay, but how much of this is actually real? Well, let's be honest. That's the only question that matters. And the only honest answer is this: that depends on what you mean by real. Because when you start connecting dots this big, dots that stretch across time, psychology, technology, and maybe even the code of the universe itself, things get slippery. Yes, we showed you facts. The Schumann resonance is rising. The USSR did collapse with barely a shot. Missing 411 is statistically verifiable. DARPA did pivot into cognitive warfare. DNA is acting weirder than it used to. MK Ultra did disappear from documentation after the 80s. None of that's theory. It's archived, peer-reviewed, declassified. But here's the kicker. None of it proves reality was reset. Correlation doesn't equal causation until it happens this many times in a row. And that's the thing, man. You can explain away any of this stuff if you try hard enough, if you cherry pick data, if you tell yourself, there's no way this could be coordinated. And maybe that's true. But you know what scares me more than believing this is real? Believing it isn't, and still feeling like something's wrong. Because here's where things get really uncomfortable. Even if none of this was intentional, even if the 1988 reset wasn't a literal patch update to reality, what's the alternative? That this all just happened? That the internet, mass distraction, memory glitches, black site vanishings, AI, cults, DNA anomalies, electromagnetic shifts, and 1,000 microfractures in our shared experience just randomly lined up after a single year in history? Okay. Let's say it's all a coincidence. Well, let's go there. But then explain this. Why do people born after 1988 feel different? Why does the generational gap feel like a timeline rupture, not just a cultural shift? Why is it that people keep describing the same dreamlike memory of how things used to feel, but can't name what changed? Why do more people than ever say they don't trust time anymore, like something broke and never got fixed? And why are the people who remember things differently being told they're crazy? That's not conspiracy. That's gaslighting on a global scale. They're protecting it from us, from you, right now, watching this video, starting to realize that maybe you were never meant to pull this many threads. Maybe this system isn't designed to reveal itself, and yet here you are, still asking the question, is any of this real? So let's answer it. It's all real, or none of it is. The truth, it doesn't actually matter, because what matters now is that you saw it. You can't unsee this. And the next time your memories don't line up, the next time reality feels off by half a frame, the next time you see someone glitch in the wild, you'll remember this moment, and you'll wonder if you ever really left 1988 at all. We've traced the fracture lines, the economic weirdness, the memory glitches, the data purges, the AI infiltration, the surveillance nets tightening, the rituals getting louder and sloppier. And now we're left with one question. What actually happened in 1988? Was it the beginning of the end, or just the end of a beginning we never understood? Because the more you dig, the less 1988 looks like a spontaneous shift and more like a planned upload, a controlled reboot, a recalibration of something much bigger than government, culture, or physics. But here's the twist nobody saw coming. What if 1988 wasn't the first time? What if we've done this before, over and over, across ages, across versions, rewritten timelines, scrubbed memories, redacted realities? Because every few decades, things get too unstable, too many anomalies, too many questions, too many people noticing. And when that happens, the system pushes a patch, silently, surgically, permanently. What if you've lived through this more than once? What if that's why you can't shake the feeling that something's wrong, but you can't name it? What if deja vu isn't a glitch, it's a scar, a leftover echo from a version of you that lived through a different draft of this world, a different run? And what if we're nearing the next one? Think about the signs. Memory collapse is now a meme. The past is constantly shifting. Facts aren't facts anymore. And the most powerful systems on Earth are fighting not to fix reality, but to control how you remember it. That's not stability, that's preparation. You feel it, everyone does. Something is lining up, coalescing. The frequency is getting louder, the parameters are bending, and somewhere deep in the machine, another patch is getting ready. Maybe this one will be smoother. Maybe this one will finally overwrite the anomalies. Maybe you won't even notice. Or maybe this time the system crashes completely. Either way, now you know. You were never supposed to notice the update, but you did. And now we see them too. Alright, you made it to the end, which means either you're deeply curious or you've already lived through a few resets yourself. I'm Ralph, and this has been another high voltage descent into the subterranean files of reality. If this episode short-circuited your brain, hit like, subscribe, and punch the bell icon before the next patch erases this video from your memory. No, seriously, we don't run ads. We don't push merch. We're not sponsored by deodorant brands or VPNs. This channel survives because you support it. And if you want more, deeper cuts, extended episodes, and topics that YouTube would absolutely short-circuit over, then head over to patreon.com/Divergent Files. That's where we stash the really weird stuff. Wendo?
Yeah, hey. If this video shows up in your recommendations twice, it's not a glitch, it's a patch. And while you're here, do me a favor. Like the video, subscribe, leave a comment. Because every time you don't, Ralph gets an idea for another one of these mind-melting videos, and I have to sit through even more simulations. Help me, please.
Listen, your curiosity keeps this thing alive. Your comments, they fuel the next deep dive. Your questions, they open the next rabbit hole. So drop your theories below. What if this wasn't the first reset? What if you've already felt the next one booting up? And as always, stay skeptical, stay awake, and whatever you do, don't ignore the glitches. You're not crazy, you're just updated. And you are truly appreciated.